The United States is at war, not just on the ground, but in cyberspace. The US military is developing software which will allow military personnel to create multiple fake online identities, also known as sock puppets. Their mission: go into chat rooms and other online forums and spread pro-American messages. Critics call it propaganda. The Pentagon calls it countering violent, extremist and enemy ideology outside the US.
Legislation was quietly signed into law a little over a week ago. President Obama signed a bill that allows the U.S. government to combat foreign propaganda by creating its own. Let's take a look and give it a reality check. Well, a little over a week ago, President Obama quietly signed into law the 2017 National Defense Authorization Act. That act is a military funding act, and in this case, it authorized $611 billion for military spending in 2017. No big deal, right? But so often there are additional laws and spending bills tucked into the NDAA, and this year was no exception. This time, it was something called the Countering Foreign Propaganda and Disinformation Act of 2016. Oh yes, this bill, which was on the Senate side, sponsored by Ohio Senator Rob Portman, is designed to combat what is called foreign propaganda from organizations such as RT, China's CCTV, or Iran's Press TV. Here's why Portman says the bill is necessary. Quote, surprisingly, there is currently no single U.S. governmental agency or department charged with the national level deployment, integration, and synchronization of whole government strategies to counter foreign propaganda and disinformation. Well, there is now. That bipartisan bill will establish an interagency center housed at the State Department to coordinate and synchronize counter-propaganda efforts throughout the U.S. government. The bill also creates a grant program for NGOs, for think tanks, civil society, and other experts outside government who are, quote, engaged in counter-propaganda related work. Now, let's be clear. This is being sold as countering propaganda, but how do you do that? After all, if government agencies put out information to the public for the sake of altering a point of view, isn't that the very definition of propaganda? In fact, that definition is this: information, ideas, or rumors deliberately spread widely to help or harm a person, a group, a movement, an institution, a nation, etc. So this law essentially funds U.S. propaganda. But isn't that illegal? It was. But no, not anymore, because 3 years ago, wrapped inside the 2013 NDAA, was an amendment that removed the ban on the U.S. government creating propaganda and then showing it to U.S. citizens. That ban, by the way, had been in place since 1948. The 2013 amendment struck down a ban on domestic dissemination of propaganda material produced by the State Department and the Independent Broadcasting Board of Governors. It neutralized the Smith-Mundt Act of 1948 and the Foreign Relations Authorization Act in 1987 that had been passed to protect U.S. audiences from our own government's misinformation campaigns. And in 2013, when that bill was passed, most media said, oh, don't worry, the U.S. government will never actually create propaganda. But now they've created a mechanism to fund it. So what you need to know is that politicians claiming we need to fund U.S. government propaganda to protect the public from the Russians and from the Chinese. But there's a reason it was illegal for over 60 years for our government to propagandize the public, to protect the public from our own government. Reality check. Right now, 2 out of every 3 Americans in the latest polls say they have little to no trust in mainstream American media, because 2/3 of Americans already believe that they're not getting the truth. That number will likely only get worse with the legalized American government propaganda. So what is the solution here? Well, how about media just tells the truth, just reports facts, does not act as an arm for political parties or for government institutions? If we want to combat propaganda, both foreign and domestic, then shouldn't we just inform the public rather than trying to control their views? That's Reality Check. Let's talk about it.
It is priceless, especially on a birthday.
A child's happiness is priceless, especially on a birthday.
A child's happiness is priceless, especially on a birthday.
A child's happiness is priceless, especially on a birthday.
Well, a child's happiness is priceless, right? Especially on a birthday.
A child's happiness is priceless, especially on a birthday. A child's happiness is priceless, especially on a birthday.
A child's happiness is priceless, especially on their birthday.
A child's happiness is priceless, especially on birthday.
A child's happiness is priceless, especially when it comes to their birthday.
Absolutely. A child's happiness is priceless, especially on a birthday.
A child's happiness is priceless, especially on a birthday.
Well, a child's happiness is priceless, especially on a birthday.
A child's smile is priceless, especially on a birthday.
A child's happiness is priceless, especially on a birthday.
You know, a child's happiness is priceless, especially on a birthday.
A child's happiness is priceless, especially on a birthday.
A child's happiness is priceless, especially on a birthday.
It's a child's
I've actually seen
Almost every country is now reporting cases, and those who aren't may simply not have the resources to conduct surveillance.
Alarming news emerging from social media companies today about the CAPS pandemic. Twitter and Facebook are reporting they've identified and deleted a disturbing number of accounts dedicated to spreading disinformation about the outbreak. For more on this, we go to our correspondent, Catalina Parks.
Chen, these accounts were created by several state-sponsored groups intending to sow political discord, and some individuals are seemingly seeking to gain financial advantages. Violence against healthcare workers and minority populations has been increasing. A recent riot highlights the real danger in these posts. Countries are reacting in different ways as to how best to manage the overwhelming amounts of and misinformation circulating over the internet. In some cases, limited internet shutdowns are being implemented to quell panic. Thank
you, Catalina.
To quell panic. To quell panic. And here on yahoo.com, on the real lamestream media, remember that's Event201, this is real lamestream media.
Some of the tech world's biggest names announced they are joining together to combat the spread of misinformation about the coronavirus on their platforms. In a joint statement released by Microsoft, Facebook, Alphabet's Google, and Twitter, the tech giants said they will work together to quell misinformation. In addition, other tech companies...
They even use the same words. They will work together to quell misinformation. They even use the same words, guys. It's freaking amazing, dude. And then, this is going really, really, really slow. Right here, in our own country, coronavirus. Think the lockdown is bad? Try without internet. Tens of millions of people are still left out due to cost, reach of broadband. Okay, and just a small example of in our own country, up in New Hampshire, these kids was trying to do their schoolwork and they couldn't because the internet kept shutting down. Now, this wasn't intentional. In the Event201, they were saying they would purposely shut it down. This most likely was just from people being on it. Who really knows? But most likely just from everyone being on it. And then, in another country, hashtag keep it on. Internet shutdowns during the CV-19 will help spread the virus. Update 4/3/2020 reports indicate that Ethiopia has lifted internet and communication restrictions in areas they were imposed. To protect public health and human rights, it remains urgent to maintain an open and secure internet in every country, especially where authorities are deliberately cutting access, throttling the internet, or blocking apps and services. So it is going on. This is just a couple that I pulled up. There was actually a bunch of them, but let's jump right back into the video.
For more on this, we are joined by experts on crisis communications and social media, Kevin McAleese and Sarah Lee.
To me, it is clear countries need to make strong efforts to manage both mis- and disinformation. We know social media companies are working around the clock to combat these disinformation campaigns. The task of identifying every bad actor
doesn't have that tag, or bad actors can move more rapidly than Twitter, Facebook, and the others are able to respond.
Is immense. And experts agree that new disinformation campaigns are being generated every day. This is a huge problem that's going to keep us from ending the pandemic and might even lead to the fall of governments, as we saw in the Arab Spring. If the solution means controlling and reducing access to information, I think it's the right choice. If the solution means controlling and reducing access to information, I think it's the right choice.
I agree with Kevin. This is a big problem and doesn't even account for the massive amounts of misinformation being generated by legitimate users about the pandemic. But it's not just trolls who are spreading the fake news, it's often political leaders themselves.
Virus spreads across the world. Misinformation about the virus is being shared online, and some of it could be coming from foreign governments or other actors.
A top State Department official told the Washington Post last week that Russia has been creating false personas to spread misinformation on social media. The Washington Post, the State Department told the Washington Post that Russia is behind swarms of online false personas.
Global Engagement Center, which is a part of the State Department, has noticed information coming from the GRU, the IRA, and other components of the Russian government that interfered in the 2016 election. Coordinated inauthentic activity. Now, the reason we call this coordinated inauthentic activity is that it involves botnets, which spread information automatically. This is automation. It also involves real people sitting behind fake accounts, meaning they are designed to look like American accounts. They often use VPNs so that the geotags say the United States, but these are people with a political agenda sitting in an office, much like we sit in offices, designed to spread misinformation or disinformation using Twitter, Facebook, and other large social networks. You know, Vlad,
Who's to judge what's real or not? Would we trust every government to separate truth from lies?
I think this is more than just keeping the bad information out. It's also about making sure real public health information reaches the public. News is found from outlets other than social media. News organizations, public health groups, and companies need to help people take the right actions to protect themselves by promoting accurate, real information about the outbreak.
You said a key word there. Trust. So Twitter has rolled out this feature called where they tag posts with alleged manipulated media. Now, if we rewind to about a year ago, this word deepfake we heard a lot. In fact, that information or deepfakes were applied to CBS News content. We saw deepfakes used for Mark Zuckerberg and Nancy Pelosi, other political figures. Now, deepfake implies this kind of technologically sophisticated thing that looks like one thing but is another thing. Now, Twitter's manipulated media is kind of an evolution of this, and what you're getting at, Vlad, is that a post doesn't have to be totally manipulated. It can be small alterations that, just like if you change one word in a sentence, it can change the meaning of the sentence. You can do the same thing with manipulated media.
Health ministries around the world are attempting to combat mis and disinformation by amplifying public health messaging through social and traditional media. But they are being outpaced by false and misleading information. National governments are considering or have already implemented a range of interventions to combat misinformation. Some governments have taken control of national access to the internet. Others are censoring websites and social media content. And a small number have shut down internet access completely to prevent the spread of misinformation. Penalties have been put in place for spreading harmful falsehoods, including arrests. Other countries have taken a more moderate approach and have focused on promoting fact-checking efforts and working with traditional media outlets, yet these approaches are limited in scope. Social media companies report that they're doing all they can to limit the use of their platforms for nefarious or misleading purposes. But this is a technically difficult problem, and false, misleading, or half-true information is difficult to sort without limiting potentially true messages. The bottom line is that members of the public no longer know who to trust. Both the misinformation and the measures to control it have led to a crisis of confidence.
But I also think we're at a moment where the social media platforms have to step forward and recognize the moment to assert that they're a technology platform and not a broadcaster is over.
Again, social media infrastructure has become critical communication infrastructure.
They, in fact, have to be a participant in broadcasting accurate information and partnering with the scientific and health communities to counterweight, if not flood the zone, of accurate information, because to put the genie back in the bottle of the misinformation and disinformation is nigh impossible.
So flood good information. So flood good information.
And we do have, I think, a couple of strategies that are available to us, one of which is the flood strategy, second of which is relying and informing and equipping trusted sources of information with the facts so they can then pass that on. But we also need to actually think about a technological answer to this. So there is work that's being done to actually create algorithms to sift through information on these kind of social media platforms. That's being done to actually create algorithms to sift through information on these kind of social media platforms.
We need to use technology and AI to sift through misinformation so we can feed the public what we want them to hear and take away from the truth that the woke truthers and the citizens of America that are trying to wake the masses up try to tell them. That way the AI can sift through the bullshit. And what we have right here is misleadingness in the algorithm society, misinformation and disinformation. The algorithm society has arrived, and it is in the relation between data and information, context and meaning that different kinds of misleadingness can occur. Misleadingness, e.g., misinformation and disinformation, always arises as a consequence of relation between content and context. When some utterance or act is unintended misleading, it is misinformation. For instance, if the content of an utterance is inaccurate, beckoness to the utterer, the utterance might become misleading, dependent on what the receiver knows in advance, or the content of the utterance might become inaccurate and misleading due to the context within which it is presented, i.e., the meaning shifts due to the context. And basically, the algorithm society, sifts through that to give you what they consider truthful information. You know, like the fact checkers and whatnot. We already back-checked the fact-checkers of the fact-checkers, and they're liars, man. They're liars. They're paid opposition. Paid, controlled opposition. If the misleading is successful and the disinformee is actually misled, the disinformation is an instance of deception. The prototypical instance of disinformation is a lie. However, it need not to be a lie in order to be disinformation. All it has to be is just leading someone in the wrong way with a little bit of truth mixed with a little bit of lie, and that's how they do it. Anyway, you get the message. The tricky part about misinformation and disinformation is that they are not success terms. This means that something can be misinformation or disinformation independent of whether someone is actually misled. It all depends on the intentions. And with that said, you just heard her, they need the technology, they need to use it to sift through the bullcrap. A deep learning approach to combating misinformation. March 20th. AI scientists are mobilizing to combat the CV. Here's how the provinces are holding them back. These projects are using AI to fight misinformation. And you just heard it from her mouth yourself.
And I know that the Gates Foundation and others are funding organisations to work on things like this. In order that the Gates Foundation and others are funding organisations to work on things like this, in order that
in fact, that staff tells me places where internet access has been shut down, there's unrest growing. So we're not only dealing with this specific situation, but really people not trusting their governments at this point. And so I think we really need to make sure, one, from a news perspective, that that information is being disseminated correctly and that we have the right resources out there.
And therefore, there's legitimacy to what's being communicated. And so be clear about what's being communicated that we know and that is right, but also be very clear about communicating what is absolutely wrong. It means it's very important not to deny, but to speak to them very clearly in the context of a daily briefing from, in this case, I can't imagine any other institution than WHO being the focal point. and we should use it. We should get it on our side. We should work together with them, and we should try to avoid this misinformation. And another topic is, I mean, our industry, there are indications meanwhile that we are getting this social conspiracy theory topic, that we are part of this conspiracy theory, that we are supporting this, that wealthy countries will spread out caps to get in this social conspiracy theory topic, that we are part of this conspiracy theory, that we are supporting this, that wealthy countries will spread out caps to.
Damn it, you boy, you just had to go and do it now, didn't you? Now, I'm not even gonna pull up stuff, but as you just seen this dude right here, right? That they're part of the conspiracy. They're going to be blaming us. There's going to be conspiracies going around that we did it. They came out of a biolab. Right. Event201. Pandemic, scamdemic, boom. He just said that we're part of conspiracy. So I'm just going to give you a couple examples off the top of my head real quick, okay? Instead of showing you, okay? Boom. One, you just seen mainstream media in real life is saying that Russia is creating conspiracy theories against us. You know what I mean? Political opposition is creating conspiracy theories. Then you have our own government saying, hey, China, now they're blaming China, it came from a lab, you know what I mean? You got our own government doing that. And then you got China saying the U.S. Army is the one that went over there and put it in a lab, that we're the ones that started, right? Then you got the people sitting right at the table. And my bet is that's who they were talking about. They knew that they would become part of it, because you got John Hopkins right there, and you got Bill and Melinda Foundation. Bill, there's a lot of tags that say Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, right? And I mean, I could come right here and I can go like this. I could just type in like this. Boom. Watch. Bill Gates is blamed for COVID-19 conspiracy, and then boom, they pop up everywhere. Look, here you got the dangerous CV conspiracy theories targeting the G5 tech, Bill Gates, and World Affair. Got another one right here, another one right here, another one right here. I don't even call the dude Bill Gates no more. I just call him Hell Gates. Hell Gates. Hell Gates. Like not Hail, like Hail Hitler, like H-A-I-L, not that. H-E-L-L. Hell Gates. But boom.
Community, perhaps married to and as a filter for helping to discern the truth from the misinformation on the technology platforms is going to be an important part of this response.
First is that we have to recognize that we are all susceptible to misinformation based on our prior beliefs and experience. And I think with the social media platforms, there's an opportunity to understand who it is that's susceptible in what form to misinformation. So I think there's an opportunity to collect data from that communication mechanism. The second thing is, with that ability, we can identify false information more quickly. We are actually receiving reports about people trying treatments that are purported to be effective but are actually harmful. And the quicker that's recognized and can be countered, the fewer people will fall susceptible to those things.
Good morning. I want to talk about the Wired piece on ibuprofen and the panic that started. To take us back, I mean, there's always been panics about misinformation and information snowballing, but it's magnified in this day and age.
Yeah, it's magnified because we're so worried and we're so looking for anything that will help, any sign of a cure or anything we can tweet about. So we're absolutely primed and activated for misinformation. The ibuprofen story is fascinating because there's a medical research group puts out some information about the way a specific enzyme might interact with COVID-19. And then perhaps there's another doctor who says, well, maybe there's a connection between ibuprofen and this enzyme. So you have two sort of thoughts, but no studies. And then a French minister tweets, be worried about ibuprofen and COVID-19, and suddenly it spreads just because of the speed at which misinformation can spread.
Okay, I'm gonna stop right there, guys. And just I want to give you an example. Remember what Red just said. You know, the military dude named Red right there, representing CDC for America. He said in Event201 that there would be people that come forward that with these that want to try to make money, which we've seen that, and they would have these, solutions and these cures and these fixes that would be what they consider at Event201, which would be misinformation. Da, da, da. So here's one example, and then we can go with the chloroquine. Am I saying that right? The hydrochloroquine. I think that I'm saying it right there. The hydroxychloroquine. That's one. Vitamin C, which you'll also hear from this lady right here.
A 75% increase in the news coming from authoritative sources since the beginning of 2020. So we've seen a lot of demand there. But then we also
what does that mean? That means an increase in video views for those?
Yeah, and so we talk about that as raising authoritative information. But then we also talk about removing information that is problematic. Of course, anything that is medically unsubstantiated, so people saying like, take vitamin C, take turmeric, like those will cure you. Those are the examples of things that would be a violation of our policy. Anything that would go against World Health Organization recommendations would be a violation of our policy. And so remove is another really important part of our policy.
So you're not just putting the truth next to the lie. You're taking the lie down. That's a pretty aggressive approach.
Piggy.
Well, we do remove, across YouTube in non-pandemic times, information that is a violation of our policy. And we've had community guidelines since the very beginning of YouTube, and we've always, anything that is a violation of our policy, we do remove it. And what was really unique about this was just how fast-moving the COVID-19 crisis was. And so we've had to make numerous policy changes all within a really short period of time to be able to make sure that we stayed abreast of the changes. So, for example, just recently there was a theory that 5G was causing coronavirus symptoms. Now, no established health organization says that 5G is the source of the issue, and so that we quickly deemed that a violation of our policies with COVID-19 and removed that content.
Okay, when we talk about our health, who do we typically trust? Our physician. And we're not talking about that right now. So, we need the physicians and the medical community really out there on the forefront talking about this.
News to share from our member companies. Rumors are actually spreading that the antivirals are causing CAPS, and so patients are not taking them anymore. And this is particularly an area where we have government mistrust.
By now, we have more cases in China and also death cases reported, and also my staff told me that because there's misinformation and there's some belief, people believe this is a man-made, some pharmaceutical company made the virus, so there are some violations and even death is because of this misinformation.
But dueling CV-19 blame narratives deepen U.S.-China rift. Let the blame games begin. Missouri sues China, including Wuhan lab over the CV. Come clean. U.S. presses China on CV after lab reports. So, like I said a little bit earlier, and like you just heard, the Chinese man, the China CDC dude was a dude just talking at Event201 that said there's going to be conspiracy theories that it started from a pharmaceutical company or a lab, right? They predicted that too. They know the future, guys. They know the future. And then here you go. It's happening today. But also, he said that some people might even get death threats or get killed, right? And there is actually mainstream media, either Fox, CBS, one of them is pushing a YouTuber named George Campbell, I think, for he is making up some story about who Patient Zero is, some American is Patient Zero, the real just like containment. The conspiracy in that, remember the video I made about the Netflix containment? Well, the conspiracy in that was the real Patient Zero was some scientist from America. Well, this dude on YouTube, and he has to be controlled opposition because mainstream's pushing him. They're making him look crazy, but they're still pushing him. Anytime when we go live during this, I'll try to pull him up. But the woman is supposedly, I don't believe any of this, but the story is she's getting death threats. She almost got killed because he's making up conspiracies about her being Patient Zero. You know what I mean? You see how it all comes back on people like us who are pushing real truth, searching for real truth, and just doing our due diligence.
Somewhere. So I think this is very important. We do the TOT. So make sure the healthcare workers have the right information.
one of the things we want to do is work with telecommunication companies to actually ensure that everybody has access to the kind of communications that we're interested in providing, because that's going to be critical for dealing with, obviously the explosion of the disease. And then also with the comments made about the fact that for all of the disinformation that will be put out, it's going to be important to actually have a response to those questions and to those concerns, as Stephen said. And I understand from staff that actually there are also intelligence sources identifying multiple foreign disinformation campaigns and so on. But it's all a part of a larger piece, which is to say that every time there is something that comes out that is in fact false information that is starting to actually hamper our ability to address the pandemic, then we need to be able to respond quickly to it.
What Avril said is, I think, as in previous conversations where we've talked about centralization around management of information or public health needs, there needs to be a centralized response around the communications approach that then is cascaded to informed advocates, represented in the NGO communities, the medical professionals, etc.
You mean centralized international?
But centralized on an international basis, because I think there needs to be a central repository of data, facts, and key messages.
Centralized web, the centralized information he was talking about with the mass repository you were just talking about? Yeah, like this right here.
In a field in Utah, about a half hour south of Salt Lake City, a massive construction project is wrapping up. When it is completed in a few months, it will be the world's largest repository of digital information. Its owners, the U.S. National Security Agency, the NSA. James.
Yep.
A couple of things we have to consider are, even before this began, the anti-vaccine movement was very strong, and this is something specifically through social media that has spread. So as we do the research to come up with the right vaccines to help prevent the continuation of this, how do we get the right information out there? How do we communicate the right information to ensure that the public has trust in these vaccines that we're creating?
This one's good, guys. This one's good. So, all the anti-vax information, of course they predicted this, but look at the top one. CV scamdemic is so terrifying, even die-hard anti-vaxxer moms are desperate for a CV shot. Now you know they're full of shit right there. You know that's a cold-faced, bold-faced, cold-blooded lie. But then you go on, anti-vaxxers spread fear about future CVV, right? You just heard her say it, the American woman from the Event201, you just heard her say it, and there you go. Anti-vaxxers already have unfortunately stupid CV conspiracies about the vaccine for the CV. Anti-vax politicians on the fire as coronavirus spreads. Could CV-19 weaken the anti-vax movement? I don't think so, Johnny. I'm not getting shit. I'll die first.
And secondly, news organizations in some countries are right now under a lot of pressure from their governments to provide politically favorable news. And so we have to think about, this isn't just the United States where we sometimes take the freedom of press for granted. There are countries where the news organizations are owned by the government, and how are they disseminating information, and what do we need to be thinking about? How do we communicate with those governments to ensure that misinformation and disinformation is not being spread?
Mis and disinformation, but I think what's important to counter some of that is to actually put out information or good news stories of people who have actually beat the disease.
Warmer weather, and throughout the show we'll bring you the moments that unite us, like this celebration for the Big Easy, a special send-off for a recovered COVID patient finally going home.
People who have actually beat the disease, or best practices in other parts of the world that is delivering on results and sharing that. But also I agree on the point on having a centralized source of information and a world body that could have garner the respect of everyone. And
we've talked a lot about misinformation and flooding good information. We've just started to talk a bit about disinformation and the strategy around that. And Avril or others, after Levon comments, if you have any additional thoughts about the particular approaches to disinformation that may be distinguished from misinformation. It'd be good to hear about those.
Yeah.
Levant?
Yeah, so I've received a note to say that some bad actors are actually using social media to spread rumors about specific companies in order to profit from short selling. So, along the lines of what we've been talking about, this is going to cause companies to come up now to get some of the screen time as well, because they need to spread the correct information. But one thing we haven't spoken about, and I'm wondering whether it's time to talk about this, is a step up from the part of the governments on enforcement actions against fake news, right? Some of us, these new regulations that come in place about how we deal with fake news. And maybe this is a time for us to showcase some cases where we are able to bring forward some bad actors and leave it before the courts to decide whether they have actually spread some fake news.
Because it doesn't have that label. So we're all kind of in this really tight spot where we see bad actors manipulating content, and social media firms, the only thing they can do is respond. So
That's the point.
In fact, the intent, Anne-Marie, you're exactly right. That is the intent of not just Russian bad actors, but we've seen these tactics because they're inexpensive and easy to do at large scale. We've seen these tactics deployed domestically by domestic actors for political purposes. We've seen them deployed for business purposes. We see them not just in the United States. We see these tactics deployed all over the world. And of course, coronavirus is not just a U.S. problem. It is a global problem. And when we see disinformation propagated, it can oftentimes target municipalities. It can target local cultures. And this really just amplifies the divisions that already exist, and it can kind of grind down the polarity, or create polarity and kind of grind down the discourse and make, well, my side versus your side, and who's to say which side is right?
It really disinformation. The line between disinformation and misinformation is not always an easy one to find, and the reality is the greatest, way to impact it, in my experience, is not to let it sit. So in other words, find your trusted interlocutors that are capable of saying, this is not acceptable, this is in fact the truth, here's the information. And I think the community of survivors is one example, but there's a whole series, employers, trusted faith leaders, variety of health workers, and so on can be part of that. In addition, obviously, you want to work with the private sector and those who are spreading information generally, to see that they can bring things down that are in fact lies or false information that's being put forward as a way to minimize it. But having a source, a national source, an international source, other trusted sources, and really guiding everybody towards that information is one of the most effective ways to deal with the situation. Guiding everybody towards that information is one of the most effective.
It is really important that we do not believe everything that we instantly scroll past and see on social networks, and that we trust organizations that have vetted their content. There really is not a ton we can do, although social networks have built in these mechanisms to flag and report content. Often those mechanisms are exploited by brigades, large groups of people who want to flag authentic content and drive it down as well. So the real thing that we can do is make sure that we are following content that is by reliable, trustworthy actors, and not necessarily believe the things that we want to believe, but believe the things that are vetted and fact and science-based.
Ways to deal with the situation.
The outcome of the CAPS pandemic in Event201 was catastrophic. 65 million people died in the first 18 months. The outbreak was small at first and initially seemed controllable, but then it started spreading in densely crowded and impoverished neighborhoods of megacities. From that point on, the spread of the disease was explosive. Within 6 months, cases were occurring in nearly every country. At first, wealthy countries with advanced healthcare and public health systems were primarily able to limit the spread of the disease within their borders. As systems became overwhelmed, however, no countries were able to control its spread. And the disease affected people of all socioeconomic status, from the very poor to the extremely rich, from sanitation workers to CEOs and national leaders. The economic consequences were dramatic. The high death toll and even greater numbers of sick hurt productivity in many industries. Manufacturers were having trouble filling orders, and countless companies in the service sector simply shut down. The global economy was in a free fall. The GDP down 11%. Stock markets around the world plummeted between 20 and 40% and headed into a downward cycle of fear and low expectation. Businesses were not borrowing, banks were not lending. Everyone was just hoping to hunker down and weather the storm. While nearly all businesses were affected, certain sectors were especially hard hit. Travel, finance, service, manufacturing, healthcare, and insurance among them, with some major companies going bankrupt. And there were seismic societal consequences as well. The world saw large-scale protests and in some places riots. People were angry about the lack of access to healthcare and medicine, as well as government's inability to protect them from the disease. This led to violent crackdowns in some countries and even martial law. Political upheaval became the rule across the globe. The public lost trust in their respective administrations. Several governments fell, while others were desperately striving to hold on to power. This spurred further crackdowns. Attempts to control media messaging, originally aimed only at health-related misinformation, became used increasingly to quash political dissent. Economists say the economic turmoil caused by such a pandemic will last for years, perhaps a decade. The societal impacts, the loss of faith in government, the distrust of news, and the breakdown of social cohesion could last even longer. We have to ask, did this need to be so bad? Are there things we could have done in the 5 to 10 years leading up to the pandemic that would have lessened the catastrophic consequences? We believe the answer is yes. So, are we as a global community now finally ready to do the hard work needed to prepare for the next pandemic?